everybody, and welcome back to an Invisible and Invisible Illness Awareness Project. Last week I talked about elimination diets in general. This week I wanted to go just a bit more in depth on the individual elimination diets. First elimination diet I did was low histamine diet, and the reason was because my GI said in order to do the blood test for histamine, you have to be on a low histamine diet first, and then you kind of test your blood to see if the levels of histamine are naturally too high or levels of DAO are naturally too low. My primary doctor at the time told me before I even talked to the GI that it was kind of pointless to do a blood test because they're not reliable at all, and I kind of tend to agree with him. I also talked to somebody in the meantime who said that going low histamine before you test kind of defeats the purpose, because you need to know if your histamine levels are too high or DAO too low on a normal diet, which does kind of make sense. But anyway, I cut the high histamine foods out of my diet. First of all, at the time I had just started drinking wine more often because the sulfite in the wine was causing me chest pain because of my EOE, where my esophagus was damaged from the impaction. And I was trying to figure out which wines were safe and which ones were gonna cause me a night of pain. So I started buying a bunch of different wines. I kind of figured that the really cheap wines are gonna have the most sulfites, which also makes sense. And I ended up learning a lot about sulfite. Like cheaper wines and sweeter wines tend to have more added sulfite because it's gonna help preserve the flavor if there's more sugar or more artificial additives. All wine contains some amount of sulfites, but organic wine will tend to have about 25% less. Plus you can get wine that has no added sulfites, which is great because then you only have to deal with the naturally occurring sulfites. Obviously, as part of going low histamine, I had to cut out the wine first. I've since discovered that there are very few wines that are histamine free, and there's some kind of wand you can buy and swirl it around in the wine that'll remove the histamine. So there are some options for some people to still enjoy wine. Generally, when you go low histamine, you're gonna have to cut out the wine and just get by without it. And especially when you're first starting out with the elimination diet, you're gonna have to cut it out either way just to see how you respond and sort of get a feel for everything. Interestingly enough, it seems that white wine contains more sulfites, but red wine contains more histamine. So it's, I guess, kind of a balancing game, figuring out which ones you can tolerate, finding that sweet spot. Chocolate is another one that has to go. I did cut out chocolate for quite a while, and then when I started eating it again, I was only eating organic chocolate because it seems like every other chocolate contains soy lecithin as the emulgator, or however you say all that. Organic chocolates tend to not use soy, although some of them do. There was a while there where I was just buying like raw chocolates, and then I decided to start making chocolate on my own, which was actually a lot of fun. The reason it's better to go with raw chocolate is that unprocessed cacao is supposed to have less histamine than processed chocolate. And there actually are a lot more brands of raw chocolate popping up, and that's basically what I tried to do when I made the chocolate myself. It also had to be dark chocolate, but now that I tolerate dairy a bit better, I can eat milk chocolate again. But of course, at that point, chocolate had to go too. I also seem to be really addicted to these type of sausages like salami, chorizo, those like flavorful, spicy, fatty sausages. And I know that's not good at all, but I would just kind of binge on them sometimes. I would get like a whole thing of salami and eat nothing but that, and I would be really thirsty afterwards, so at least it got me drinking a lot of water. But I would be so full that that would pretty much cover me for the day, and that was sort of my off day of not having to cook. So obviously that had to go too. Then there's a lot of other foods that are naturally high in histamine, like tomatoes and spinach, and all of that stuff had to go. There are other little tricks you can use to sort of circumvent the histamine. Like if you have a problem with tomatoes, you can try to get those green or yellow tomatoes that are not yet ripe. Those are going to have lower histamine. If you have an issue with bananas and you try to get them when they're green too. Anything where you can get it as early as possible. Because basically, the longer something's been around, the higher the histamine is going to be. For a while there, I bought all of my meat frozen. I would defrost it when I was ready to cook it, and then I would eat it within 24 hours. But for a lot of people, even that is not enough. The only meat they can tolerate is when they get it directly from the butcher within hours of it being slaughtered, and they freeze it right away. Because sometimes if you buy stuff frozen, it might not have been frozen right away. Buy it directly from the butcher, freeze it at home, defrost it in a pressure cooker so it's being cooked directly, no time is wasted. As soon as it's finished cooking, they put it in the freezer and they defrost it right before they're ready to eat it. So it never spends any time just sitting out unfrozen, even in the fridge. That's not stopping the process, and freezing doesn't destroy histamine. Fortunately, buying my food frozen and eating it within 24 hours was enough. I didn't have to go quite so far, but there were times where like somebody I guess misunderstood what I was saying and bought some fresh meat in the store, which ironically is not going to be as fresh as the frozen meat, and decided to freeze it at home and then defrost it when it was time to cook it, and I got really sick from that. Not the same at all. That's just a lesson for all the people out there who think that we're just making this up and can't really tell the difference. But yeah, same goes for fruits, vegetables. You get them as fresh off the vine as possible, as young as possible. Any sort of meals in general that might be okay when they're fresh are one thing, but no leftovers that haven't been frozen in the meantime. Nothing that's been aged in any way. So I really cut things down, and at first I did notice that I had a bit more energy, and it didn't last very long. It quickly kind of like faded off, and I was pretty much back where I had been before. But the interesting thing was that I had been taking quercetin for years, and the person who recommended it to me told me that it was the kind of thing you take just temporarily. Your body sort of builds up an immunity so that you don't have to take quercetin long term. But in my case, I would notice when I would run out of it for a few days until I get more, that it was like full on cold, like nose running constantly. I would have to have a tissue stuffed up in there. Sometimes I would leave the house with a scarf up to my nose to hide the tissue because I just could not have a tissue stuffed up my nose. Yeah, but during those years when I was taking quercetin, it was like I never got a cold anymore, and I used to get colds all the time. But then once I went low histamine, I could stop taking the quercetin, and my nose wasn't running, the acne didn't come back. I used to have this clogged sort of feeling in my ears, like where you have to yawn, but I could never get rid of it. That went away. I'd have this pain in my elbow and I'd have to keep popping it. That went away. There was all kinds of symptoms that led up after I stopped this, and those kind of things you really wouldn't expect. But there was also like my intolerance to cold that led up. I would be like really shivering and cold at like 15 degrees, and by the time it got down to 5, I was like freezing cold, and I couldn't just stand there and chit chat. I had to go quickly to get inside. That stopped. I stopped having to pee constantly, and a lot of it was just the feeling of having to pee but not actually needing to. I would also have this thing in the cold where my toes would go numb, and that stopped. So in a lot of ways, my life did improve going low histamine. Now that it's been a few years, of course, I kind of test it in a lot of ways and see, because you don't want to just remove everything and assume that that's it. You want to challenge it, reintroduce it, see if you really need to be eliminating it so that you're not restricting yourself more than necessary. And in my case, I could say that now if I eat chocolate or sausage, I actually do okay with it. It's really not an issue. The wine kind of depends, but it's really more of an EOE reaction, I feel, because I can feel it in my esophagus more than anything else. Histamine reaction to me is more that feeling where I can't keep my eyes open. Like when I was trialing everything and I would eat eggs, it would be like 15 minutes later I'm out. And then I would try eating meat and it would take like 12 hours before it hit me. And I would have this sort of hyper feeling in the middle of the night or early in the morning where I felt like I wanted to get up and do a lot of stuff, but I hadn't slept enough, so I'd lay there till I went back to sleep, and then when I woke up again, I would be like I couldn't move, and like that was the standard reaction for me. And it was also something I noticed once I went low histamine. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night, like every single night. Like I was actually able to sleep through the night. Now I'd say I really have no sleep schedule whatsoever, but at the time I thought that was interesting. So wine is kind of a hit or miss. I normally avoid it, but I just kind of recently started trying it, and sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. I still have to be careful with any kind of pickled type stuff like capers or artichokes, pickled cucumbers. I realize that tomatoes are not an issue for me either. When it comes to meat, I can eat fresh meat that hasn't been frozen again, but I still do check the date and get the one that has the longest time until it expires. You'll hear people say that you can actually eat stuff a week after it expires, and I definitely don't want to go there. I still want it to be as fresh as possible. Even for a while after I started eating fresh meat again, I still couldn't eat ground meat. When you have all those little cuts in it, the histamine can build up even faster. Now I'm doing okay with that, but I still can't eat any of that stuff which is sitting in that pre-seasoned marinade. That's usually the meat at the store that's the closest to expiring, and then they put the seasoning on it just to make it last longer. So I definitely have to stay away from that or I will get sick. But other than that, fortunately, my options have opened up a lot more than what they were a few years ago. Unfortunately, that isn't always possible for everyone with histamine intolerance, but obviously we're all trying everything we can to get us as far in that direction as possible. So a lot of these histamine trigger foods I really don't have to avoid, but I still wouldn't go so far as to say I don't have histamine intolerance, because it does still happen. And I actually started a hashtag for this, hashtag histamine hyper, to describe that feeling I get in the middle of the night or early morning where I just feel really hyper all of a sudden, and I'm like, you know, where is this energy coming from? And then hashtag histamine coma for the other end of the spectrum a few hours later when it's like I haven't even moved, but I still feel like I can't move. So just the low histamine diet by itself is already really isolating, because how do you go out and eat with other people? How do you travel, really? So if you're thinking about trying a low histamine diet yourself, let us know what thoughts are going through your head. If you have any questions you'd like answered. If you have tried a low histamine diet, did it help? Did you figure out that wasn't the problem for you? Did you stick with it long term? How did it improve your life or not? Let us know in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and you like the channel, go ahead and do that now. Don't forget, we've got some chronic illness awareness t-shirts in the Teespring shop. Check those out and grab yourself one. If you'd like to help support this channel, you can become a patron on Patreon and pledge as little as $1 a month. If you'd like to support me directly, you can donate to my GoFundMe. Believe me, I really would appreciate it. And if you'd like to help contribute to subtitles, especially translations into other languages, to make these videos more accessible to people who are hard of hearing, deaf, or just don't speak English as their first language, I would really appreciate that too. You can find all of the links in the description, and I will see you guys next week.